What happens when a legendary martial artist, an icon of strength, respect, and discipline, steps into what should be a friendly late-night interview, only to realize the stage has been set for humiliation? Tonight, we peel back the curtain on a confrontation that erupted live on the Jimmy Kimmel show, one so intense it left security scrambling, audiences stunned, and Chuck Norris walking off the set with his dignity untouchable. This isn't just a talk show moment. This was a war of principles, where respect was put to the ultimate test. Hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, was Chuck right to walk out? Because once you hear what unfolded, you might rethink everything you've ever believed about Hollywood and late-night television. Chuck Norris entered the brightly lit Jimmy Kimmel live stage with the calm, composed walk of a seasoned warrior. Applause rained down in waves, people standing, whistling, cheering. Not just for a movie star, but for a man whose very name had become folklore. His steps were firm, his jaw set, and his smile genuine. He sat down, adjusting his jacket with that same precision that had made him a Hollywood icon and a martial arts legend. "Chuck Norris, everybody," Jimmy Kimmel called out, his familiar grin wide as the applause finally tapered off. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Chuck replied, his voice warm but grounded in authority. The conversation began harmlessly enough, the typical back-and-forth banter. Jimmy leaned in, his tone light. "So, Chuck, I've got to ask, all these Chuck Norris facts flying around online, you know, Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice, or Chuck Norris can divide by zero. What's it like seeing yourself become the ultimate internet meme?" Chuck nodded, lips curling into a slight smile. "It's funny, really. I take it as a compliment. Some of them are pretty clever. My family gets a good laugh out of it." But Jimmy's grin twitched, just slightly. A glint of something else appeared in his eyes. Amusement, yes, but something sharper too. "Right, but here's the thing I'm wondering," Jimmy said, his tone still friendly, but with an undercurrent Chuck didn't miss. "All these jokes, does it ever make you think you've become a caricature of yourself? When was the last time you actually lived up to the legend, Chuck?" The air shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. The crowd's laughter softened into uneasy murmurs. Chuck's posture straightened, an instinctive shift, his expression neutral but alert. Martial artists knew the signs, a readiness for confrontation. "I'm not sure I follow, Jimmy," Chuck said calmly. Jimmy leaned forward, voice dipping into mock innocence. "I mean, come on, Chuck. You're 80 now, right? You do infomercials for exercise machines, haven't headlined a big movie in years. Don't you think it's time to admit the whole Chuck Norris legend is just a fun little myth?" The words cut through the room like a blade, silencing the audience almost instantly. Even the house band shifted uncomfortably. Chuck's gaze didn't waver. "Jimmy," he said, his tone controlled, "I've been fortunate enough to enjoy a long career. I've entertained people, taught martial arts, served my country. I don't feel the need to prove anything anymore." But Jimmy wasn't finished. The grin stayed on his face, but the intent behind it had changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It was sharp, pushing, prodding. "But that's just it," Jimmy pressed, leaning forward more aggressively now. "You've built this whole unbeatable persona. But if we're being honest, what have you done that's really been extraordinary lately? Bruce Lee revolutionized martial arts. Jackie Chan still does his own stunts in his 60s. Steven Seagal, okay, maybe he's a bad example," Jimmy quipped, earning a ripple of awkward laughter. Chuck didn't blink. He stared directly at Jimmy. "What exactly are you trying to say here, Jimmy?" Jimmy's grin widened like a man who thought he was winning a game. "I'm saying, maybe it's time we talked honestly about how there's a gap, a pretty big one, between the legend of Chuck Norris and the reality." The energy in the room shifted from entertainment to confrontation. You could feel it in the stillness of the crowd, in the cameras zooming in for every eyebrow twitch, every muscle tightening in Chuck's jaw. Chuck's response was quieter now, his voice carrying more weight. "I came here to share some stories, talk about my career, my family, not to be disrespected." Jimmy's laugh came, but it sounded forced. "Disrespected? Chuck, come on. I'm just asking questions. Isn't that the point of interviews? Or do you only go on shows where people worship you?" Chuck's body remained perfectly still, too still, his breathing slow and even. There's a difference between asking questions and humiliating someone for entertainment. Jimmy shrugged, feigning innocence. "Oh, come on, Chuck, you can't handle a little heat? The guy who's supposed to be tougher than steel is getting upset over a few questions? Should I grab you a tissue?" A gasp swept through the audience. The moment had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Jimmy had gone too far. And Jimmy finally realized it. Chuck turned, fixing Jimmy with a gaze that could shatter concrete. Jimmy, I've worked with true professionals in my life. I've sat down with journalists who ask tough questions to enlighten audiences, and I've sat across from men who ask tough questions to inflate their own egos. Which one are you? Jimmy's grin faltered, cracks beginning to show. You tell me, Chuck. Is this how you treat every guest, or just me tonight? Chuck's voice was low, but the edge of steel was impossible to miss. Even the band went silent. The studio drowned in tension thick enough to slice with a blade. Jimmy adjusted his seat, visibly squirming, but trying to hold his ground. Look, Jimmy started, chuckling awkwardly. This is just how late night works. We have fun. We poke a little fun. You're not used to being challenged, maybe. Chuck's jaw flexed. Jimmy, I've faced challengers in the ring who could break bones in seconds. I've worked with directors who pushed me through impossible stunts. I've been challenged in life in ways you can't even comprehend. This, what you're doing, isn't a challenge. It's an ambush. Jimmy scoffed, leaning back in his chair, clinging to whatever control he thought he had left. Come on, Chuck, you're a public figure. You've made millions off this tough guy image. Don't you think it's fair for people to ask what's behind the curtain? When was the last time you were in a real fight? I mean a real one, not some choreographed movie scene. Everyone in the studio knew what was happening. Jimmy wasn't asking questions anymore. He was baiting, poking, pushing Chuck toward a breaking point, hoping to score a viral moment. Chuck's voice didn't waver. Calm, steady, but with an unmistakable steel edge. Are you asking me to prove something to you, Jimmy? Jimmy smirked. No, I'm just saying. Maybe it's time to admit the Chuck Norris legend. It's just marketing. Chuck leaned forward slightly, his presence suddenly larger, heavier. So you think I'm all marketing, all smoke and mirrors? Jimmy's grin widened, thinking he had the upper hand. I think you're a businessman who turned a martial arts career into a brand. And hey, good for you. But let's not pretend you're the unstoppable force the internet makes you out to be. Silence fell again, thicker than before. Chuck studied Jimmy's face with the kind of precision you only learn after decades in combat. Watching, calculating. And then his voice cut through the quiet, controlled but commanding. Jimmy, let me ask you something. Do you even understand what respect is? Jimmy blinked, chuckling nervously. Of course I know what respect is. I don't think you do, Chuck said, unwavering. Respect is earned, sure. But it's also shown. You don't walk into someone's home and spit on their carpet. You don't invite a guest on your show, then spend the whole time trying to tear them down for a cheap laugh. Jimmy shifted in his seat, his grip tightening around his cue cards. This is my show, Chuck. My house. I'll ask the questions I want to ask. Chuck's lips tightened, jawline flexing. Then maybe you should be prepared for your guests to get up and leave when they realize they're being set up. Jimmy's pride wouldn't let him back down. He leaned forward, doubling down, voice rising. No, I want you to stay, Chuck. I want you to be honest for once. Stop hiding behind this tough guy mask and admit it. The Chuck Norris legend is just a character. Just smoke, just mirrors, just another Hollywood story. A hush blanketed the room. You could hear breathing. You could hear nothing else. Chuck's chair creaked softly as he stood, smooth, fluid, every movement controlled with military precision. He towered now, no longer just a guest on a talk show, but a force that made the entire studio feel like it had shrunk in on itself. You're right about one thing, Jimmy, Chuck said, voice low but filled with undeniable weight. The legend, that's a character. That's entertainment. The man standing in front of you? That's something very different. Jimmy swallowed, the realization creeping in that he'd lost whatever control he thought he had. Chuck's voice sharpened, cutting through the air. The man standing in front of you doesn't need to prove anything to a talk show host. The man standing in front of you spent his life learning respect, discipline, honor. And I'm done standing here while you disrespect all of it. Jimmy waved a dismissive hand. Chuck, sit down. You're making this awkward. Chuck's laugh was quiet, hollow. No, Jimmy. You made this awkward the moment you turned this interview into a public ambush. Jimmy tried again, voice shaking, faltering. Come on, Chuck. This is comedy. This is late night. People tune in for this. Chuck's glare didn't soften. No, people tune in for entertainment. What you just did. That was bullying. And I don't stick around for bullies. A couple of security guards edged forward from the side of the stage, but Chuck raised a hand without breaking eye contact with Jimmy. No need, Chuck said firmly. I don't need security. I'm leaving on my own terms. Jimmy's panic started seeping through the cracks in his smile. You can't just leave, Chuck. We've got segments, sponsors, we've got a show to finish. Chuck turned toward the audience, scanning the crowd with a calm but somber expression. No one came here tonight to watch a guest be ridiculed. They came for a conversation. A good time. Maybe even some wisdom. What they got was an ambush. Jimmy's jaw clenched. This is television, Chuck. It's not personal. Chuck's head tilted, voice flattening. That's where you're wrong. It's always personal when you humiliate someone to get a laugh. Jimmy shot back, desperate to salvage something. Oh please, you could have done Ellen's show if you wanted cupcakes and hugs. Chuck took a slow step forward, voice dropping to a near whisper that carried across the entire studio. Ellen treats her guests with respect. You treat your guests like punching bags. The room stood still. The cameras, the crew, the audience. Everyone frozen as the moment unfolded. Jimmy's tone cracked, reaching for authority that had already left him. I've been doing this for years, Chuck. I've had presidents, movie stars. I've grilled all of them. It's how late night works. Chuck's eyes narrowed, his stare pinning Jimmy to the spot. Grilling is asking tough questions. You didn't grill me, Jimmy. You tried to embarrass me. Jimmy's voice was a whisper now, strained. It's show business. Chuck gave a slow, controlled nod. Exactly. Business. Not personal. Until you make it personal. Which you just did. Chuck's fingers moved calmly to his microphone, unclipping it with slow, deliberate motions. His entire demeanor radiated control, discipline, and power. Not the reckless, out-of-control energy Jimmy had tried to provoke, but something far more intimidating. Unwavering self-respect. Jimmy's laugh cracked awkwardly. What? So you're just going to walk off in the middle of the show? That's your big statement. Chuck placed the microphone gently on the desk, his eyes never leaving Jimmy. No statement, he said, voice clear and strong. I don't need to make one. My actions speak for themselves. You don't invite someone to your table just to spit in their face. Jimmy's panic now was impossible to hide. His voice pitched higher. This is what we do. This is how talk shows work, Chuck. We make jokes, we push buttons. It's part of the job. Chuck shook his head slowly, the disappointment visible on his face. There's pushing buttons, Jimmy. And then there's crossing lines. You crossed a line. Jimmy stepped forward from behind his desk, clenching his cue cards tighter, desperation oozing from his posture. So what? You're going to play the victim now? Is that the new Chuck Norris brand? The guy who walks away from a little heat? Chuck turned fully to face Jimmy, his frame towering over the smaller host, his voice taking on a measured calm that made every word land with the force of a sledgehammer. Jimmy, in my life, I've faced men twice my size, trained with warriors who could break every bone in my body, and stood my ground in places where respect was life or death. You think this, he gestured around the stage. This little circus act of yours is heat? This is nothing. This is just sad. Jimmy's lips parted, his comeback caught in his throat, unable to escape. Chuck continued. There's a reason people respected Johnny Carson. There's a reason guests still talk about how David Letterman made them feel comfortable, even when asking tough questions. Because those men understood something you clearly don't. Respect brings out the best in people. Disrespect only shows how small you really are. A ripple of awkward shifting moved through the audience. The uncomfortable truth in Chuck's words settled in the air like smoke. Jimmy's producer stood just off stage, making frantic cutting gestures, but Jimmy ignored him, his ego bruised, his pride refusing to let go. Jimmy sneered. You think you're better than me, Chuck? Just because you can kick a bag in half doesn't make you morally superior. You've been in your share of B-movies, pushed your fitness products, sold your name like anyone else. You're just another celebrity, and you're here, on my show, because you need the attention. Chuck's next step forward was quiet, but the impact was thunderous. He leaned in just enough so only Jimmy could hear him. But the microphone, still hot, picked up every syllable. You invited me, Jimmy. You needed me for ratings. I agreed, because I thought we'd have a meaningful conversation. Not because I needed attention, but because I respected the platform. You turned it into a cheap stunt. That's on you. Jimmy's nostrils flared, clinging to the last shreds of defiance. This is late-night television, Chuck. Grow up. Chuck smiled, not a warm or pleasant smile. An expression of clarity, of resolve. No, Jimmy. This is you, hiding behind your desk, attacking people who can't fight back, because you think it makes you funny. I didn't come here to fight, Jimmy. I came to talk. But you wanted a fight. And now you're learning that some fights, you lose before you even start. Jimmy blinked rapidly, searching for a comeback. There was none. Chuck's voice softened, but his words remained razor-sharp. This will be remembered. Not for the cheap laughs, Not for your sarcastic digs, but for you being shown exactly who you are by the guest you tried to humiliate. Jimmy's breathing quickened. You don't scare me, Chuck. Chuck's shoulders rolled back, his stance rock solid. I don't have to. I don't need to. My presence, my life, my respect for myself, is enough. The studio lights seemed dimmer, the audience watching in stunned silence, unsure where to look. Jimmy's mask of control was shattered, his forced grin gone, replaced by flushed cheeks and darting eyes. Chuck turned slightly, addressing the audience for the first time. For those watching, remember something. Strength isn't measured by who can shout the loudest, or who throws the most insults. It's measured by who can rise above it, who can walk away with dignity when faced with disrespect. Jimmy's throat bobbed in a hard swallow, fists clenched by his sides. Chuck placed his hands behind his back, military posture returning. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Chuck turned away from Jimmy's desk, walking with the same calm, controlled composure that had made him a martial arts icon. Every step echoed through the studio, the silence louder than any applause could have been. The audience remained frozen, unsure if they were witnessing an unscripted implosion of a talk show or the most dignified exit in late-night history. Jimmy stood motionless, his hand gripping the edge of his desk, as if it could hold together his rapidly crumbling authority. He forced a shallow laugh, his voice shaky. Yeah, go ahead, walk out. See if anybody remembers you after this. Chuck stopped at the edge of the stage, turning back with that same quiet strength that had held audiences captive for decades. Oh, they'll remember, he said calmly, his tone unwavering. But not for the reasons you think. Jimmy's jaw tightened. You think you've won something here? Chuck tilted his head slightly. I didn't come here to win or lose, Jimmy. I came here to have a respectful conversation. You made it into a contest. And in your need to win, you lost everything that matters. Jimmy's lips curled in frustration, his pride refusing to let the moment end. You can try to spin this, but you just walked off my show, in front of millions. Chuck's expression was unshaken. That's the difference between us, Jimmy. You think leaving a toxic environment is weakness. I know it's strength. You think embarrassing your guest is entertainment. I know it's cowardice. Jimmy was breathing heavily now, his shoulders tense, as Chuck turned back toward the exit. The security guards stood at the sides, unsure if they should intervene, watching the most surreal moment of their careers unfold. Chuck walked past them without hesitation. Don't bother, he said quietly. I'm not your problem. He is. He nodded back toward Jimmy, who stood alone under the bright stage lights, his confidence drained, his swagger gone. The audience, still silent, watched as Chuck disappeared behind the curtain. Moments later, the heavy studio doors clicked shut. Jimmy swallowed hard, adjusting his tie with shaky hands, staring at the space Chuck had just vacated. He tried to regain composure, turning to the camera with a weak grin. Well, that was intense. No laughter came. No applause followed. The tension remained, suffocating and undeniable. That's Chuck Norris, everybody, Jimmy muttered, but even he didn't believe it anymore. Backstage, Chuck walked calmly toward the exit. Crew members parted for him, silent, some offering quiet nods of respect. Chuck didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't revel in the chaos left behind. He simply walked out, dignified, composed, undefeated. As he reached the studio lot, Chuck took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling the weight of the encounter leave his shoulders. His phone buzzed in his pocket, his publicist, no doubt. But he ignored it. Some moments didn't need a PR spin. Some moments just needed to be felt, absorbed, remembered. Inside the studio, Jimmy fumbled through the rest of his monologue, his jokes falling flat, his rhythm gone. The control room was a mess, producers scrambling to cut segments, figure out how to salvage the episode. By the next morning, clips of the confrontation were everywhere. Social media exploded. Headlines didn't talk about Jimmy's cleverness. They talked about his arrogance, his disrespect, his public meltdown. The narrative was set. Chuck Norris, calm under fire, walking away with dignity, while Jimmy Kimmel self-destructed on live television. Memes were made, but not at Chuck's expense, at Jimmy's. Late-night colleagues weighed in, some condemning Jimmy's tactics, others praising Chuck's composure. Journalists debated the line between edgy interviews and outright bullying. The public chose their side, and it wasn't Jimmy's. Chuck stayed silent. No statements, no interviews. He didn't need to explain himself. His actions had spoken louder than any words could. A week later, Jimmy opened his show with a sheepish grin, trying to laugh it off. Ratings dipped. Sponsors asked questions. Behind the scenes, network executives were concerned about the fallout. Chuck, meanwhile, continued his life, teaching, mentoring, quietly engaging in projects he cared about. He received calls from producers, from other talk shows begging him to appear. He politely declined, because for Chuck Norris, respect was never negotiable. And when faced with disrespect, he didn't shout. He didn't punch. He didn't play their game. He simply stood tall, spoke with dignity, and walked away. Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more explosive stories from Hollywood's most dramatic moments.